I can respect that you like the low fence and you don't like the idea of high fence hunting. You know, some of these hunting operations that have, and this may makes people mad, they may know someone or do have an operation like this, but you're on like 100 or 200 acres and it's high fence and you're having hunts out there and you have hunters come and then they go buy deer or buy animals and they'll put them on the property, you know, a week or two before the hunters come out there and stuff like that, you know, I don't agree with that. That's the kind of high fence hunting I'm against, you know. And I mean, I just think that's a little. It's just not hunting to me. That's just shooting.
Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, episode number 221. Shawn Smith, a discussion of high fence hunting, low fence hunting, deer breeding, and genetics. Please support our sponsors as they make this show possible. Today's show is sponsored by Black Ash Outdoor Products. Reduce your risk of tree stand suspension trauma with a Tree Stand Wingman, the Tree Stand Emergency Descender System. The Enforcer. Take control of your odor footprint with your personal ozone generator. Covert Scouting Cameras. Remote cameras for hunting, wildlife, and security. The Horny Buck Seed Company. It's all about the freshest seed. Morse's Sporting Goods. A full line of sporting goods without the sales tax. Northwoods Common Sense. New England's finest whitetail deer lures, 100% fresh, pure, and undiluted. And Big Buck merch for only $19.99. You can get a cool, high-quality Big Buck t-shirt and show support for this podcast by visiting www.bigbukregistry.com/MERCH. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
Hi, this is Barry Wenzel from Brothers of the Bow and Trophy Whitetail Boot Camps. I'm not really sure what a podcast is, but you're about to push play on what is now my favorite podcast, Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hi, this is Dan Infold from HuntingBeast.com. You're about to listen to one of my favorite podcasts, Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hey, this is Hal Blood from Big Woods Bucks, and you're about to push play on my favorite podcast, the Big Buck Registry.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow predators. My name is Jay, and thank you for tuning in to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. For Dusty Phillips and Jim Keller and the entire staff here at the Big Buck Registry, welcome to this week's show. There are a couple things I'd like you to do for us if you could. If you would, please check us out on iTunes, subscribe, and leave us a review. With your help, we're going to try and push this show up the iTunes charts. I know we have a lot of listeners out there, and I need you to take some action. I need you to leave a review and subscribe to the show. If you do subscribe, that'll give you access and notification each and every week that a new show is released. You can also access this show in its entirety on YouTube, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and Google Play. It's all right there for you to access on demand at your fingertips. Regarding the harness program, we have an ample supply of harnesses to give away from our volunteer donors. If you're in need of a full-body harness, please send an email to j@bigbukregistry.com. Seems like one of the most controversial topics amongst hunters these days is high fence hunting, so we decided to take another deep look into the subject, only this time with Shawn Smith from Texas. Shawn, along with his father Rowan, runs a high fence, low fence ranch, a deer breeding and genetics facility, and a deer fence manufacturing company. There are many permits involved in running a high fence ranch, state-granted benefits, state agency involvement, and there are quite a few things that we can learn from deer in a high-fenced, low-fenced managed hunting area that we can take to the field, even on public grounds. We'll turn to our interview with Shawn Smith in just a moment, but before we do, let's turn to Jim Keller with the Deer News.
For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News. Our first story this week: Indiana deer hunters can no longer use rifles on public land. This story is from the Fox 59 website. The Indiana DNR posted updated information regarding recent legislation that affects the use of rifles during deer hunting season. Due to House Enrolled Act 1415 that was passed earlier this year by the Indiana General Assembly, hunters can no longer use rifles when hunting deer on public land, according to the DNR. The DNR says public land includes both state and federal property. Before the change was made this year, the use of rifles was legal on public land. It is still legal to use a muzzleloader, shotgun, or handgun on public land. As far as private land use goes, HEA 1415 allows some additional rifle cartridges to be used. Here's a summary of the rifle requirements for hunting deer on private land. The rifle must have a barrel length of at least 16 inches. The rifle cartridges must have a cartridge case length of at least 1.16 inches and have a maximum case length of 3 inches. The cartridge must fire a bullet with a diameter that is 0.243 inches, same as a 6mm or larger. A hunter may not possess more than 10 such cartridges for each of these rifles while hunting deer. These new rifle cartridges may only be used on private land. Full metal jacketed bullets are illegal. The new rifle cartridges may be used during the youth deer season, deer firearm season, special antlerless firearm season where open, and deer reduction season in deer reduction zones where local ordinances allow the use of a firearm from the start of the regular firearm season through the end of the following January. The 2017-2018 deer hunting season starts November 18th for firearms. CWD Summit held in Michigan. This story is a subset of a report on the deeranddeerhunting.com website and is reported by Alan Clemens. CWD recently was the focus of a multi-day summit in Michigan. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention states that CWD may take more than a year to develop an infected deer. It also warns about ongoing precautions to ensure that CWD does not enter the human food chain. The agency also offers suggestions about handling deer killed in areas known to have CWD. To be as safe as possible and decrease their potential risk of exposure to CWD, hunters should take the following steps when hunting in areas with CWD. Do not shoot, handle, or eat meat from deer or elk that look sick or are acting strangely or are found dead, such as roadkill. When field dressing a deer, wear latex or rubber gloves when dressing the animal or handling the meat. Minimize how much you handle the organs of the animal, particularly the brain or spinal cord tissues. Do not use household knives or other kitchen utensils for field dressing. Check state wildlife and public health guidance to see whether the testing of animals is recommended or required. Recommendations vary by state, but information about testing is available from the many state wildlife agencies. Strongly consider having the deer or elk tested for CWD before you eat the meat. If you have your deer or elk commercially processed, consider asking that your animal be processed individually to avoid mixing meat with multiple animals. If your animal tests positive for CWD, do not eat meat from that animal. Arbys to sell deer sandwiches nationwide for one day only. This story is from the New York Daily News website and was reported by Constance Gibbs. Arbys is on a mission to have all the meats. The purveyor of fast food roast beef sandwiches is expanding its menu nationwide for one day only. In what looks like it is becoming an annual Arbys tradition, the chain will re-release their venison burger nationwide, which they debuted last fall, while also testing elk sandwiches in 3 states. On Saturday, October 21st, which is towards the beginning of deer hunting season in many states, Arbys will be selling venison burgers in all 3,300 restaurants across the country. The chain did this last year for nearly a month-long period in 6 states, and it was a big hit. Some locations sold out within 15 minutes. The sandwich features a thick slab of venison steak with crispy onions and juniper berry cabernet sauce on a toasted roll. This year, the company took greater pains to secure enough meat to last a little longer than 15 minutes, but with the ever-present caveat that quantities are limited. Chief Marketing Officer Jim Taylor told USA Today if people are interested in trying the sandwich, the only way to guarantee they can get one is to get there when we open or a little before and make sure they are in line, just like the folks did last year. Taylor told USA Today that production to get enough venison product from New Zealand suppliers took a year. In select locations in Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana, Arbys will sell elk sandwiches, a popular hunting species in those states. The elk sandwich will be topped with blackberry port sauce and crispy onions, so line up early. That concludes this week's edition of the Big Buck Registry's Deer News. For links to the stories featured this week, please check our show notes at www.bigbuckregistry.com. If you have any ideas about future topics or have any questions about any of these topics, please email me at jim@bigbuckregistry.com. For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Well, thanks to Jim Keller with the Deer News. Without further ado, here is Shawn Smith. Shawn Smith, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. How are you, my friend?
Pretty good, Jay. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Very well. Where are you at right now?
I'm down here in Houston, Texas, actually. Just still recovering from the Harvey incident and all that.
Yep. I was going to ask you how'd you fare?
We fared pretty good. You know, we were blessed. Some friends of mine were not. My mother was actually down in Rockport during the hurricane. She lives down there, but she fared just fine too. A little damage, but other than that, we were blessed. I was able to help out some friends, and so we made the best of it for sure.
Gotcha. Well, it sounds like you've come through and survived with some fortitude. Sounds like everything's getting back to normal.
Yeah, it is.
Excellent. John, tell me about yourself. Where are you from? Where did you grow up?
Well, I'm a Texan, born and raised right here in Houston. I was born here, lived here for a couple of years, and then I moved down to Rockport, which is right on the coast. It's a little fishing town here on the Gulf Coast, and it's known for their duck hunting and their red fishing. And so naturally, I got into duck hunting, red fishing, and everything in between. I grew up there till I was about 13, moved back to Houston, finished schooling, went to TCU up in Fort Worth for college, came back to Houston, and started doing construction utility, and also started working on ranching and deer breeding with my father. We started getting into the business. Just, it started off as just, we were on hunting leases all the time, every year. Sometimes we'd, get kicked off, or we'd want to leave for one reason or the other. They jumped the price, or there weren't enough deer, or weren't seeing much, or whatever. And then eventually we got tired of that and, saved up and were able to get a ranch, piece of property, and start improving it, and kind of went that route with the ranch and got into cattle. And we've been doing that for about 12 years now. And I also have an event planning company as well as a high fence company called Game Lock Fence. We basically supply high fences, and I got into that through the ranch and doing all the ranching. Because a part of ranching too is, you have to manage the ranch and the budget of the ranch. And when you have a deer breeding operation and feed costs and all these things popping up all the time, I mean, it's, you really have to, you want things that are quality. You want to do, quality work, but you also want to do it affordably. So,
right.
So that's why I kind of got into the fencing business and things like that.
Gotcha. All right. So you've got a lot going on.
Yeah.
We've got a lot to explore in this show. So
yeah.
Let's get in. And when I think of Texas, I think of ranches, and I think of cattle and longhorns, and so it sounds like you're right in the mix of all that stuff.
Yeah, it's what you expect. We're not quite South Texas. I mean, it's Southwest Texas. We're up in the hill country, a little north of Uvalde, so you got some limestone, a little bit of sandy soil, but not much. We're just north of all that red sandy soil, but there's plenty of cactus, a lot of oak trees, mesquite. So yeah, it's definitely that Texas feel, and ours is loaded full of black Angus, and some Wagyu. So yeah, we have all the big cattle out there, cattle operation as well as the deer breeding operation and hunting.
Very cool. Well, I want to touch on the ranch itself along the way here, and I also want to get into deer breeding because that's a subject we really haven't touched on before, and I think we've got a lot to learn about that, and I don't know if it helps out wild populations that are non-fenced or not, but I think there's some things that we can explore.
Yeah.
So tell me about your ranch and how that all came about and how your dad got into it.
Well, yeah, like I said, Jay, we used to do a lot of hunting ranches and leases where me and my brother and my dad would go out and get on a lease with some buddies and go hunt on low fence and put up feeders. And we even protein feed every year. And there was a struggle with that because some of the leasees would protein feed, some wouldn't, this, that, and the other. So that's when we started looking for our own ranch. My dad's construction business started doing pretty good to where he was able to be blessed enough to where we were able to get a ranch, and he came across it, and it was just one of those things where right place, right time. It was a beautiful piece of property, kind of off of a back road, so it wasn't a lot of easily accessible. And he went out there, and it was just a gorgeous piece of property. family, the owner had passed, and some of the siblings wanted it, some didn't, so they sold some of the property, and we got the section they didn't. So that's how we first got the 1,300 acres. Then, of course, we high fenced it, which was very expensive, and put out feeders and deer blinds, and started a management program where we would, supplement feed, harvest off, your older cull deer, management bucks, older does, things like that. And then we started learning about, because you're trying to keep the better genetics and spread the better genetics. And then we started hearing about this deer breeding where you can actually, first it was triple T, which a triple T is where it's a triple T permit where they'll actually go and helicopter or net a deer from one ranch, a wild deer, and they'll actually bring it on your property and drop it, and even if it's a high fence or a low fence, and they'll drop it on your property to breed, better genetics. And that's what I had heard about before, and I was like, well, okay, I could see why people would do that. We didn't end up doing that, but chasing down a deer in a helicopter wasn't really, I don't know. We just didn't end up doing that. And so we started looking into more, like genetics. Okay, what about, and then there's, sure enough, there was a deer breeding market out there. It wasn't very big in the beginning, but pretty big. In the Northeast, it was pretty big, Pennsylvania, things like that. But relatively, it was just getting started. And so we first started looking into the different deer, and then we started buying deer. And in the beginning, they wouldn't let you transport deer across state lines, things like that. So, they would let you in the beginning, but only certain states, there were different rules. And so, anyways, we bought South Texas deer. We wanted, deer that looked Texas, that were from Texas, they can survive in Texas weather, and they're pretty acclimated already to the area pretty much. So that's kind of what we went for. Started buying deer, started a deer breeding operation, and then started learning all about the struggles there are with raising deer and things to do, things not to do. And so that was a learning experience of about 5 or 6 years, and I can go on and on about that. But eventually we got into a good routine. We have a great pen design where we have very big pens. 4 or 5 acre pens are our bigger grow out pens. Then we have 1 and 2 acre breeding pens that also are connected to the grow out pens where they can come and go. But and all of our pens, we have, a lot of oak trees, a lot of brush, a lot of cover. It keeps them comfortable, keeps their stress levels down. We're big on their stress levels because it affects them in a lot of different ways, affects their babies and everything, their antler growth and everything. So, that was one big thing with us, is we made sure that we kept their stress levels down in the pens and things like that. So, and then we started, we started our breeding operation, and then we would release, the babies on the ranch or bred does. We would take the older female does in the pens, breed them, and then release them on the ranch with a tag, so you don't ever hunt that female. She's a breeder basically for genetics, and then she has a baby that was a good genetic deer, and it's a wild deer, and then all the babies it has after that are wild deer. And so that's what we've kind of done. Now, 1,300 acres is about 2 square miles, to put that into perspective. And that's how much ranch land we were working with a perimeter high fence. Okay. Now, I've hunted there before, management hunts and things like that, harvesting off, any white does and stuff we have to take off. And, I've seen deer where we hadn't seen them until they were 4 or 5, and they're the ones that don't come out much, or they're elusive or more nocturnal. And so it's still even with 1,300 acres high fence, it's still pretty wild hunting in my opinion. Now that's going to stir up a lot, I'm sure, but it's not like low fence by any means. Now, to talk about high fence and low fence real quick, if you don't mind, I hunt high fence and low fence. Now, what I enjoy hunting is low fence. I enjoy hunting low fence because you never know what you're going to see. And more importantly, I like hunting low fence state property or national wildlife, going on drawn hunts, public land, because you're out there and anybody has a chance to hunt that property. Anybody has, the ability to go out there and get the right permits and things like that. and go hunt it. And so you're going and doing what anybody can do and go and harvesting an animal. And it's not just for the trophy too, it's for the meat too. I like that hunt I was talking to you about. I drew a bow hunt down in South Texas at the Laguna Atascosa Wildlife Preserve, and they have nilgai out there, and that's really what I'm going after. I drew a whitetail tag, but you can hunt exotics as well, and they have nilgai, which are these big, 500 or 600 pound species of antelope, but they're very good eating, and that's what I'm going after. I'm going for a meat hunt, and stock up on that throughout the years. So
sure, gotcha.
But yeah, that's kind of how we got into that deer breeding operation, and where we got to, and then I can go in about the hunting and how we've developed the hunting operation as well.
Let's break that down a little bit more. I have some questions about how you got started. So you found a ranch, kind of right place, right time, 1,300 acres, correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
When did you decide that high fence needed to be placed there, and why did you decide to do that?
Well, okay, so there's a couple reasons why I've realized now why it's important, but some of the main reasons we did it was all for game management. We had just come from hunting on a lease down in South Texas where we would protein feed. We'd put up the pens to keep the hogs out, and we spent money on protein feeding and driving the long hours down to South Texas, which I'm sure some people can relate, driving those long hours just to go fill up feeders. It's hot. You're dealing with snakes and all sorts of stuff during the summer. And so we would go do that, and then we'd come down there randomly during hunting season, and there's another hunter in one of our blinds, or, there's a big blood spot at your deer blind. Just things like that. And then the other guys weren't protein feeding. They'd put up their feeders and they would never fill them because they didn't want to pay the money. So anyway, so that's why it pushed us away. And that's what also pushed us to put up a high fence, because you can get your own piece of property, whether it's 100 acres or 1,300 acres. You're going to have people around you. And if they're not on the same management program that you're in or have the same sort of mindset about management, they could really, wipe out a lot of your deer and mess your management plan up. I've known people who put up high fences on one side of their property for that kind of reason, because they know it's full of, one side borders a big, hunting club or whatever, and they just shoot whatever, stuff like that. So that's why we put up the high fence for the management plan. It's to manage the deer inside, to keep any other deer from coming in there and your deer getting out, and it's not to keep them from getting out, it's to keep them from getting shot basically, and harvested from other hunters that may go out and they see, you have a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old deer. It's a really nice trophy, but he's not a mature deer yet, and you don't want to shoot a young deer, and it's messing up your management plan and stuff like that happens. So that's the main reason why we put up the high fence, is to really be able to manage the herd.
Okay.
But yeah, that's kind of why we put the high fence up. But high fencing, man, it's expensive. It really is. When we had first put it up, we had got an exemption from the state, because since it was road frontage, they'll give you an exemption or discount on some of the fence that you put up along the roadways, but since it keeps deer from running out onto the roadways. So that was just something I thought was pretty interesting, pretty cool. It wasn't a giant savings, but it was just one of those little things that if people didn't know, now they do.
Okay. So you choose a fence. How do you go about choosing a fence to create a high fenced environment?
Well, I'll talk to you about the different types of high fences, and does a high fence really truly keep a deer in or out? Because that's a big
classic
topic.
Classic question. Yeah.
So there's different sizes of high fences height wise. So there's typical 6.5 foot and then 8 foot. We sell and use 8 foot on all of our properties. But our deer pens, those, we use 10 foot, in some places actually 12 foot. But that's because we're running deer through, alleyways and things like that. And so we, it keeps them from because a deer, I mean, it keeps them from getting up and over and hung up on the top of the fence, because I've seen deer do that and then get really injured doing that. That's kind of why we do it in the pens, and it's more close quarters and stuff. But yeah, for the perimeter, 6.5 foot fence, sure, that's I would say a deer deterrent instead of a containment, because if a buck, and I've seen it myself personally more than once, where a deer will jump a fence like that. Seen it in South Texas where a big buck was on the rut running up and down the fence, and I can already tell there was a doe on the other side. He was in rut running up and down the fence and got to a certain point where he just jumped up and over it. Now, it wasn't graceful. He jumped up, hit the top, flipped over, but he, went over it and kept going on. And that was a 6.5 foot fence. Now, I've seen deer run and jump and do the same thing on an 8 foot fence and make it over the top. Now, like I said, it's not graceful for anything, but I'll tell you, when I look at the high fence, I mean, if you're wanting to keep deer in and out and this, that, and the other, have it more of a deterrent and more containment than deterrent, then I would probably go with an 8 foot for a few reasons. But the horizontal spacing too is another thing to think about, because it's usually 6 inches or 12 inches. Well, the 6-inch spacing, and then it gets smaller as it goes down. That'll keep your fawns and stuff from getting out of the fence. It'll help deter coyotes and pigs and things like that from coming in. Pigs come in anyways. They're going to get in. I mean, there's no stopping those things. But, the more of a deterrent, if you run your perimeters, and you can block a lot of that off, and it makes it easy for snaring. I mean, we do a lot of snaring for varmints out at our property. And so whenever they, dig those little unders underneath the fence, if, they're small enough or whatnot, and they're, you can get some coyotes and foxes and things like that.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I mean, I would probably say 6-inch spacing, 8 foot tall. That's a pretty solid high fence for deer containment.
Okay. And what's it made of? Is it like a chain link fence, or what do you use for material in Texas?
So, what it is, it's 12.5 gauge steel wire, but it's been electro galvanized. So it has a zinc coating all the way around, basically a galvanized coating all the way around all of the wire that it's made with, and it's made out of high tensile wire, so it's very, very strong, and it can stretch a little, but it's very strong. That's what it's made out of. Chain link, it's a little more flexible, and it can give a little more, but it's much more expensive. Now, the type of fence we use is fixed knot, and so what it means is essentially, especially when you tie it in, the vertical wires that go all the way around your property horizontally around that fence, there's 23 of them up and down that go all the way around. They're all connected, and they're all one single strand pretty much, except for where gates are and things like that. So, and then there's a knot, and that's that, it's a unique fixed knot, a wire knot that connects the vertical and the horizontal wires together. And so that way there's up and down there's solid wires, and horizontally there's solid wires. And it makes it a really strong mesh that can give a little bit. And then another thing about ours, they have tension wires or tension curves in them. Tension curves lets where if a deer does run up and jump, and he jumps into the fence, which people have probably seen before, it'll actually give and stretch. Those tension curves gives it a little bit of flexibility to stretch, and the deer kind of bounces off of it. And so it doesn't damage the fence near as much, especially if it's a big animal, things like that. This high tensile fence too, it also is very resilient to weather. I mean, we've used it down in South Texas. You have that salt mist all the time, and stuff works great, lasts for a very long time. That zinc coating is what makes it last for a very long time.
Okay.
And then up north too, in the real cold and ice and stuff like that, all the weight of the ice on the fence and stuff, as long as you have solid T-posts and stuff and put them close enough together, the fence holds up fine.
Gotcha. All right. If a buck can jump a 6-foot fence standing still, and other deer can jump an 8-foot fence on the run, what's the difference between high fence and low fence?
Well,
is there a definition of what you consider to be the high fence type fencing versus the low fence type fencing?
Yeah, and then and then I've heard the other thing too. If it's like we're on the Texas coast, well, if 3 sides of your property is high fence, but the other side's not, but it's, it's along the water, along the bay, is that a high fence ranch or not? Because, I've seen deer swim across the bay.
Sure.
So it's technically not. So, I mean, it gets to be a fine line, of what is high fence, what is low fence. I mean, to me, this is just me personally, a high fence, if you're putting up a fence that a deer cannot freely cross on a daily basis, like that a game trail could not come up to it and a deer can cross it on a daily basis, I would say that's a high fence for, if it's taller than that or it's deterring deer from crossing it on a daily or frequent basis. No, I mean, not daily, but weekly. If it's its territory, basically. If you're limiting its territory, I would say that's a high fence. A 4-foot fence, you're not limiting a deer's territory, really. I mean, it can jump in it and it can travel to and from. You can have game trails, but those high fences, they don't typically have game trails. And maybe some pigs crawling underneath it, but that's about it. That's what I would say is a high fence. That's what I would consider a high fence. I mean, it could be a 5.5-foot fence, or however you wanted to put it, is if it's deterring deer from jumping across it. I mean, there's people that have done double fences and it's not high because they're one's 4 and one's 5. I mean, it just doesn't. That's what I'm. Yeah, I guess that's a good way to define it. If it deters or it limits a deer's range to where it's mainly confined within the limits of the fence, then I would say that's a high fence.
Okay. All right. What do you consider the look of a Texas whitetail? You mentioned that you're trying to keep the look. What does that mean?
Well, those I don't know if you've hunted down in Texas, Jay, but
I have not.
So the Texas feel, in my opinion, from all the years that I've hunted and all of the places I've hunted all across Texas too. And there's something about that South Texas feel. When I mean that South Texas brush country, cactus, mesquite, 5, 6, 8 foot maybe brush country, and you have a big buck coming through, dark chocolate antlers, dark gray hair on its body. I mean, just a big, real majestic, dark antlered, dark bodied, gray bodied buck walking through. Big, wide, clean, typical 10-point or 12-point, real nice, clean, typical, and maybe those ivory tips. That's another little thing that I've noticed about those South Texas big bucks. I mean, when they rub on those mesquite trees and things, it gets them that in their genetics, give them that chocolatey antlered look, that darker antlered look. That's what I mean when I refer to those I guess South Texas or Texas buck. In comparison would be like, if you go up north and hunted, I mean, you'll get these a little bit longer haired bodies, a little more red to it, fluffier tails, bigger bodies, and also the white antlers too, the whiter antlers. I mean, you can get darker antlered deer up north, and I've seen they're brownish and orangish, but there's just a certain look, I guess, for the Texas deer kind of have that certain look. And, I mean, some deer up north too look like it. Every deer doesn't look the same, but I've seen deer in South Texas look a little bit, but most of them have that shorter gray-haired body versus that longer-haired reddish look up north with the wider antlers.
Okay. So after you buy the land, you set up your fence. What's the next step? Like, what's the next part of that plan?
Well, what we did is we put up the fence, pretty much the majority of it. There was a few perimeter gates that we left open, and during the last phase of the building, we started feeding. We were putting out our deer feeders and making sure we were feeding pretty heavily because we wanted to get abundance of deer, and there was also a lot of exotics in the area where there was axis, black bucks. We wanted to have those on our property, so we fed a lot. It was during the summer. We fed a lot, and we had water out there, and then we finished high fencing and closing the gates towards the end. Then we got with the Texas Parks and Wildlife, your local biologist to get a managed land deer permit. Now, this is separate from deer breeding. And I want to tie in here in a little bit, Jay, where you can have a high fence ranch and deer breeding versus a high fenced or a low fence ranch, but you can still incorporate these genetics. And I can talk about how and the best way to do that without high fencing your property.
Okay. Definitely want to get into that down the road.
Yeah, because that's a lot of things when people I talk to. I say, look, and I'll give you some examples too, some food for thought stuff too that'll blow your mind. But yeah, so we would we'd high fence the ranch, and then we started working on the deer breeding program, and then we making sure that there's enough water troughs and figuring out where we're going to put our blinds and if we needed to clear senderos and things like that. And we use a lot of supplement feeding in the area we're at, feeders, things like that. Food plots, they work. As far as how the deer travel, they're going to be traveling to the food plots are free choice. Feeders aren't. However, we were putting out gravity fed protein feeders, so they were going through it like crazy. Okay. And a lot of guys do that, and I can tell you some pointers that we've done that helped save a ton of money. But yeah, it's putting out your protein feeders, knowing what your herd is. We worked with your local biologist. I strongly suggest getting your property set up as a MLD property. It's just a managed land deer property. You can work with the biologist, your local Parks and Wildlife, and they'll work with you on how to do surveys and things like that. So you know how many deer to take off your property. And so what we would do is we would do these spotlight surveys. We'd go out a couple of different times throughout the year and spotlight, and we count, doe, buck, fawn, this, that, and the other, and do these. And then we submit them to the Parks and Wildlife, and they will basically give us tags letting us know how many deer that we need to harvest off the property to help us manage the herd. We work with them to help, because they kind of can let given it a drought year or whatever. If they think that the fawn crop's not going to be as good, or given your spotlight survey. So that's really important. You're going to learn a lot just by doing that. And that's what your local Texas Parks and Wildlife or your local biologist in the area. And then you get your MLD permits. Now, your MLD permits in Texas, how it works is we get, usually hunting seasons like November 1st to, beginning of January, mid-January, something like that. An MLD permit, after the second year of doing it, you can start hunting October 1st all the way till the end of February. And the reason is it gives you an opportunity to manage your herd a little bit longer, to harvest off the certain, deer that you need to harvest. A little later in the winter in February, you can go out to the food and really get on like some of the older does and things like that are pretty elusive during hunting season and things like that. Okay. But that's kind of that's the direction we went. And then we started realizing, we're going to have to harvest off on 1,300 acres. We're going to have to harvest quite a few deer, and this is more than just friends and family and stuff. And we don't want to go out and just have to harvest these, all these deer. And, so we wanted to try to get other people to go hunting. So, we invite our friends and family and stuff out there and started selling weekend hunts is how we got started into that. And then we went into, started doing weekend hunts, and then we did that for a few years, and we weren't really hunting the property much ourselves, at least not for trophies or anything, which was okay with me. I enjoyed taking people out there and getting them on a nice trophy or management deer. And it didn't take but a couple of years, and we started seeing all the deer that we had been releasing, the genetics we've been putting out there and harvesting off the older deer, and it really started showing a lot. We started producing, 160, 170 inch, native wild deer born on the ranch, never been handled or anything, just because of your genetics, And then now we had a deer harvested last year that was well into the 200s, And these are big framey deer. These aren't all typical. Not all the deer that we have out there are just typical frame bucks, but we go for the big typical frame with kickers and drop tines and things like that, with some of that. But it's mainly that big framey mainframe 10, 12 point look, and that's kind of what we try to maintain. You get some gnarly stuff every now and then. Okay. So, no avoiding that. But yes, that's kind of how we got into the hunting.
Okay. You had mentioned something about a benefit to putting up a fence with the state. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, when we put up our first property, because it was on a highway or on a roadway, and it was an FM road, farm to market road, for the frontage, for the fence that you put down the front, they would give you a tax. It was either, I'd have to guess my account, but it was either a tax credit or some kind of a credit or discount, or they would, a refund or whatever it is. But for putting up the high fence along highways, since it's a highway frontage, you're keeping deer from coming out onto the road and jeopardizing people. So it's kind of an incentive they do, or to help out. So if you're putting it on the roadways, that's why I think they do it. I mean, it could be because the roadways are a risk of people running into your fence, which we've had happen once so far. I don't know. I'm not, but I think it's to keep the deer off the roadways. I mean, it makes sense to me. I mean, in Canada, I know they've been high fencing certain roadways, or putting 6.5 foot fences on certain roadways to keep the deer and stuff from crossing, and they even have overpasses with game trails underneath them.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, up in Canada. I thought that was the craziest thing, but it's a wildlife overpass, essentially.
I've heard it all. That's crazy. Okay.
Yeah. They have high fences that go down the highway that kind of funnels them. It's kind of cool.
So there's a tax benefit to keeping deer off the road and keeping them away from motorists.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a tax benefit for that, for sure, when you first put it up. And I mean, that's the thing. I mean, high fencing your property is very expensive too. And that's why we got into the fencing business, because it was just very, very expensive.
Right.
So we were able to find some ways to lower the costs and things like that, and do it affordably. Right.
How much does it cost to high fence 1,300 acres? Not what it cost you, but today, in today's market, what would that cost?
Oh, man. Well, let's see. 1,300 acres would be about, it depends on the terrain of the property. I would probably say, I'm just doing some math here. It would probably cost you around anywhere from $80,000 to $100,000, I would think. Something like that. Okay. Depends on how many gates. Depends on how many. And that's if you did it in house. Like we did it ourselves. We put a crew together and things like that. You start, which most people, they'll go out and they'll hire a fence crew, a fence company, and to just, hey, I need a high fence my ranch. They do the gates and everything. We went out and kind of put an ad out in the newspaper that we needed a fence crew that knew how to put up a high fence. We rented all the materials. We went and purchased or rented the equipment. We went and purchased the materials just to make it a little cheaper. I mean, and that's why I say anywhere from 80 to 100. I mean, I've seen some crazy prices for fence jobs, and they look great, but they're just almost twice as expensive. So, I mean, yeah, you can get $150,000 expense on a $1,300 or 1,300 acre ranch, just depending on what you're doing and how many gates and things like that. That's right.
Well, I'm sure there's lots of variables that go into it. But just in general, that seems to be something to think about.
Yeah, Jay, now I would like to talk about this since we're on the topic about cost of high fence. Yeah. So a lot of people say, okay, well, look, it sounds like, if you have the money, or if you have the ranch and the money to high fence it, it's great. High fence it, you can put some deer on it, manage your herd. Now, what if you only have a couple hundred acres? I mean, when does it start to be a canned hunt? And you name the deer out on your ranch because it's 100 acres and there's only a certain amount of deer out there. So this is what I've recommended to people before is, and what I've seen some people do, and I'll give you an example of down in South Texas where I'm pretty sure that this is what happened, but. So what a lot of people do, let's say you have a piece of property, 100, 200 acres or whatnot. You can, and let's say you wanted to improve genetics. Say, I want to improve the genetics. I don't want to high fence it. I'd be willing to spend some money on deer. I spend money on protein feed every year and all these feeders and stuff. Sure, I'll spend some money on deer this year, instead of doing that, or I'm going to do it just, to do something more than just protein feed. Yep. So what you do is you can get with your, I know in Texas Parks and Wildlife, and you can get a DMP permit, which it's a DMP permit is from Texas Parks and Wildlife, and it gives you the ability where you can take deer, you can buy it from a breeder, for example, and put it in a pen. They have rules about the size. I think it's a 5-acre pen. So you would have to build a little 5-acre pen on your property, which is a lot cheaper than the high fence in it. Mm-hmm. You put them in there, and then with a breeder buck, and what I recommend is you buy bred does that are already bred with a buck, put them in a pen, they fawn out over the summer, they get pregnant again that winter, and then you release them because there's a certain date you have to release them in the fall, winter. That way they're acclimated there, they get used to the area, they're going to tend to stick around too if they've been in that little penned area. They tend to stay around the area because there's been food there and they're comfortable with it. So you can release them, and it's kind of a soft release, and then they're out in the wild and they're breeding and spreading their genetics. That's what I've seen and recommended to people when they do it, or whether you have a high fenced ranch or not. I mean, you can do it that way, but especially on low fences, if you're wanting to, increase genetics, that's how I recommend doing it, rather than just taking them from one ranch and just releasing them out on your ranch, because there's some benefits when they're in the pen at the beginning. They're getting used to the environment, the weather, the terrain. I mean, there's all these different little things. I mean, the water. I mean, there's a lot of different things in the new areas that they go to, unless it's like right down the street. But I mean, if it's a new area, there's some acclimation that they need to go through, and it's just a little bit better if you kind of do that, and then you just go and start opening up the gates, and then they can come and go as they feel. And I mean, so that's kind of what I recommend. If you're wanting to say, hey, what's the cheapest and best route to do to increase the genetics on the property, that's how I would recommend to do it. And it's pretty affordable. You'd be surprised.
Okay.
Pretty surprised what bred doe can go for.
Okay. Very good. You had mentioned that you bring in the state biologist to assist you with the analysis of how many deer should be taken off the property.
Right.
And they give you tags. Are those tags legitimate state tags? Like, those are those tags that you have to report after the kill, or are these just recommendations?
Yeah. Well, it's actually it's a whole program from the state. So the first year you're part of the program, there's certain surveys and things you have to do and submit in paperwork, and then you have to report every kill, what portion of the property, the age of the deer, how many points, I mean, the sex, I mean, all these different things. And then you submit all those documents to the state with the tag numbers and things like that they gave you. They also take how many tags you didn't use to incorporate that into your calculations for the next year. Okay. And so that's why after this first year, the second year, they're actually tags from the state. Just like it's almost like a hunting license, but it's for that ranch for this deer only. So you can only use it on this ranch for this deer. And so, like, if someone were to come out there and harvest a whitetail, they would use our ranch tag and not their Texas state tag, because it's a managed property. Okay. Managed property. But It's still the Texas tag.
Still a Texas tag, but it's a different type of tag to recognize where it came from.
Yeah, because, I mean, if you think about it, the tag that you get from Texas Parks and Wildlife, hey, I'm in this county, you can harvest this many bucks, this many does, that's essentially a survey of them doing the same thing in that county, but they did it on your ranch, so here's the tags for your ranch, if that's a comparison.
Okay. You had mentioned that you try to reduce the stress levels on the deer inside the ranch. How do you do that? Well, okay, so that's something we've worked on. Obviously, deer like a lot of cover, and we noticed out at the property, it's not real thick on some areas, and so the deer would tend to run a lot. And, in the beginning when we first had the property, they tend to run a lot, and we didn't like that. And that's just driving to and from the deer blinds. You'd be driving and then you see them all running. And so, we obviously, they're going to run. They're a wild animal. How much stress that's putting on the deer on the property. And so what we had our guys do is we had our manager, he'd go out there, and even just twice a week, especially during the hunting season when you're going to be out there and driving around and spooking them a lot, is he just started going out there and cornering the roads every now and then. And, I know this is, again, baiting, but we wouldn't bait the feed or the blinds per se. He would go out there and just hit the
hit the corn off the Ranger for a little while, and the deers end up getting used to it. They'd still run off and things, but we noticed they weren't as scared. I guess because he was just going out there more. I think just his presence out there more. I mean, that kept the stress level down. Other than that, I mean, a deer is a wild animal. I mean, they're honestly, I mean, just you got to be quiet. You got to go in, try not to make a lot of noise, you know, give them a lot of cover, make sure they have a lot of cover and they feel comfortable. You know, I mean, I've seen some of these deer pens these guys have, and these poor deer are, you know, they put a shed, you know, they clear out a big field and then they put a sheds up, you know, for the deer to wait under because it's shaded. But that's not, you know, deer like to go and lay down up brush and thickets and, you know, and tall grass and stuff like that. And so, I mean, that's kind of how we've done our deer pens as far as the deer pens and things like that to try to keep their stress levels down. We've put up shade cloth in some of them just to try to help with, you know, it doesn't scare them as much, you know, when the cars drive. You know, the main roads is not too far away. It's every now and then the cars drive by, so we put shade cloth up to keep that from spooking them, or, you know, or anything like that. I mean, you know, a deer can get spooked pretty easily, and so, you know, we do a lot to try to keep them. And then we go out there and we, you know, our guy, our ranch manager, he's great. He goes out there and he hand feeds them pretty much, not hand by hand, but what I mean by hand, he goes out there with buckets and the bags of certain mixture that he has, and he puts it in these little troughs, and, you know, then he drives off and leaves, and then the deer will come up and eat it. But then they've gotten more comfortable. You know, when they're more comfortable, their stress levels down. When they're not comfortable, their stress levels go through the roof.
Right.
And a deer can literally die from stress. I mean, they will, stress alone can kill a deer, and it's amazing. But yeah, that's how high strung. I mean, they're wild animals. I mean, there's no taming down a deer. I mean, you can get deer that are comfortable with you. That's still a wild animal. I mean, you know.
It's interesting you bring that up. It kind of brings me to another question. I definitely want to get into the deer breeding in just a second. What have you learned along the way, being able to keep these deer where they are, about deer and deer management that could apply to anywhere? And you had mentioned a little bit about keeping certain genetics in areas and even non-fenced areas. Can you speak a little bit about some of the things you've learned that you think are relative to all deer now that you've been able to watch the way you've been able to watch in a small environment that's relative to anywhere in the country?
Yeah. Well, I'll talk to you about this. When the rut comes around, no matter what, those bucks, they're crazy, and you got to be careful, man. You got to be careful, because during the rut, it doesn't matter. I mean, I've seen deer down in South Texas in the wild during the rut, and it just will straight up look at me. I'm, 40 yards away or so, 30 yards away, look at me, and it's on the hunt for doe, and it'll look at me and just keep on going like I'm not even there. It just not a care in the world, and in the deer pens, and man, during the rut, so that you have to be very careful. Like when he goes in there and feeds and stuff, like a lot of times he can't go in there during the rut or during that time of year. He just can't. The bucks won't let him in the pen. Like they'll be standing there by the gate and they just won't let him in. I mean, if he goes in, they're territorial and they're comfortable with you, and so they're not afraid of you, and so this is their territory, so don't come into their territory. So yeah, then the pens, out in the wild during the rut, those deer do some crazy stuff. I had a ranch manager. He went in there to feed them, and he turned his back to the one of the deer, and next thing you know, he ended up getting nailed and pushed through a hardy panel wall out through a part of the deer pen. So that buck got him out of his territory. So those be careful. Just put it that way. They're big and they're strong animals, and they're graceful. But man, I mean, if you've ever seen two deer fighting, I mean, they can be dangerous. I mean, sometimes, during the rut, just be careful. I mean, they're not going to come up and attack you like a bear or something like that. But they just can be dangerous. But yeah, some things I've noticed. I would probably say their cover, things like that. Their fawn. I mean, one of the things that amazes me the most about seeing those deer up close and being able to work with the deer is the fawns and the babies, and and how that whole process works, because you see a mother give birth and she's walking around, one morning, and then that afternoon, she's giving birth, has a baby on the ground, cleans it off, licks it off, eats all the stuff that comes out to keep the smell down, for nutrients and to keep the smell down, because naturally, their predators can smell that. They're going to know what that smell is, and they're going to come. So, and then it doesn't take long. So whenever the fawns happen, we're having to walk the pens every day, because we go over in there and we give them some medication and stuff to make sure they're going to be, strong and there's no problems with them. Sometimes you'll find the fawns and at a bed of ants, fire ants or something, and you will have to clean them off and give them some medication to make sure they don't die.
Right.
And you'd be surprised how common that is. And if it's common in the pens, it happens out in the wild, man. And seeing that too, fire ants, you wouldn't think that kill fawns. It kills a lot of fawns.
No kidding. Fire ants kills fawns. That's fascinating.
Fire ants will kill fawns. A mom will drop them, and it won't be too far from the fire ants. And they're pretty. And fire ants too. They're raging in the summer, summer months when they're giving birth too. And you got to think that all that juice and stuff all over the baby too. So, but yeah, they'll straight up kill a fawn. Rattlesnakes. We've had a couple of rattlesnakes kill fawn. Killed a buck one time, bit it right on the nose. But there's things like that I think about. I think about how these deer, they live in the wild. They're in a pen and stuff, and they're still going through these struggles. And you go look at them out in the wild. You imagine coyotes, and that's the other thing. That if you don't get to those fawns, the reason why you have to walk those pens every day is because the next day you probably aren't going to get it, if you can even find it. And that's the other thing. We walk every square inch of it, and find 2 fawns, and there's like 5 more. That's just how camouflaged they are, and you can walk right over those fawns and they will not move. And it's crazy how well they blend in, man. And they're just that's one of the more cool. That's one of the cooler things that we get to do is watching the fawns and dealing with the fawns and how protected the moms are. You got to watch out for them too. But how fast they go from being born to being able to run around. And you can't catch. The next day, it doesn't take but a day or two. And you good luck catching them.
Gotcha. Is your breeding system separate from your ranch, or are these deer still roaming around that are part of your breeding process? Do they still get into the regular population of your ranch? We sell a lot of our deer now, but yeah, some of the older does and things like that, we'll kick them out on the ranch if we don't sell them or give them away with people buy bucks and does to stock their ranches with. So if we don't do that, we'll kick them out on the ranches. But usually when we do, for the does, we always tag them, and then those are your breeders. And we don't really harvest those. We just let them breed because they have good, controlled, really good genetics, and just because they're, they're not as wild as the other ones. Okay.
So a lot of people don't maybe not do that, but that's just kind of what we do. We leave the tags in them. Those are our breeders. They breed till they pass, and then, or until they get old enough. With the tags, we also know the age of them. So at a certain age, we will harvest them just for because of the management program.
Okay. And who buys deer? Not specifically, but what types of places will buy deer off of breeder ranches? So
breeder ranches, they sell pretty much to 3 different markets. They sell to other deer breeders who are wanting better genetics, or they want some of your genetics, or like we have some of our bucks, our males. They're proven producers. A lot of their offspring have really good genetics and really good antlers, and they have good health and things like that. So we keep track of that. We actually DNA every single one of our deer. Every single one of our deer, we get a DNA sample and we DNA all of them, and it ties into all their parentage and all these. It's a very, very complex system. And we do that mainly for the deer breeders and just to keep track of your herd and know which deer produce, and that's the other thing. It's not just the males. People look at a male and say, well, this male's a big buck. he should be able to produce any big buck on any of these does, when it's not the case. You can have a big buck on a doe that's not a good doe, and may not produce anything. You could have a mediocre buck on a great doe, producing doe, and it produces a really big buck. But it's not always guaranteed. Again, just because it's set, good deer doesn't mean it's going to be a big offspring or whatever. So it's a complex program, but yeah. So you'll sell the deer breeders, you'll sell them does, you'll sell them fawns, you'll sell breeder bucks. You'll actually also sell semen. Semen sales are a big deal. Okay. And that's a whole other part of the breeding where we get into the actual insemination process where it's just like cattle, where they'll run them through, put them in a chute and inseminate them. And then that way you instead of buying a buck, it's a little bit cheaper sometimes to buy the semen and just do it that way. And then I mentioned to you in the beginning, I know about crossing state lines. Well, semen you can ship across state lines, no problem. But, actual deer, it's a different story. Right. Depending on the state. Okay.
Let's talk about the hunting a little bit. Like, how does the hunting go down, and what rules do you have in place for the people that come there? That's a whole other different ballgame.
Yeah. So, and this may be, outfitters and things are going to relate to a lot of what I'm about to say. So we had a property, and we wanted to do weekend hunts. Now, if you're an outfitter, you don't necessarily have to own the property to do the hunts. I mean, you lease the property or whatever, or, you have an arrangement with the landowner, and then you get hunts to come out there. So, but it's still, a weekend type, or I call it a weekend hunt, a 4 or 5 day hunt, 7 day hunt, something like that. It's a short period hunt, relatively short period hunt. So that's what we started at. Clients would have to come out. We'd go to the hunting shows. It was a lot of work, a lot of marketing, having to try to learn all that stuff and all this deer breeding and hunting and all this. It was a lot to handle, a lot to learn. So as we started getting into that and doing these hunts and going down there and guiding all the time, and I started looking into it, and I'm like, I'll tell you what we might want to try is to actually lease the property, but not lease it as like we'll lease it, but we're going to lease it in a way to where everything's taken care of. Yeah, you can bring your hunting, vehicles and things, but the blinds are there, the feeders are there, they're always full. We protein feed and keep it full. Like, we maintain the property, we provide guides if you need them, we provide cleaning if you need it. Basically it's a seasonal lease. You come out, you get a hunt, and we put a package together. And the reason why I wanted to do that is when you're doing weekend hunts and the short period hunts, you're entertaining the clients, you're putting them on deer and things like that, which is fine. It's just a lot of work, a lot of pressure, and that's fine. And I enjoyed doing that, meeting a lot of different people. But we went the seasonal lease. We wanted to try that, so we started marketing it and did the numbers and how many deer we were harvesting, kind of put some packages together and did a seasonal lease where a group pays to come out, a group of hunters, and they come out. This one's actually a corporate group, but they come out and they hunt, all of deer season, and then they've added in, a weekend of turkey season, and then some axis and things like that. And so that's what we've gone to now, and we like it a lot because we go down, I hunt on our second ranch, has some low fence. I go out there and hunt on that a lot. On both ranches, the high fences, we have leases on both, where we have groups on both. And, and I'll go out there and hunt a little bit. But like I said, we don't really shoot any trophies for ourselves on the property. I've taken one trophy off those ranches for myself in the 12 years that I've been there. And, I enjoy it. I'm looking at the deer right now. He's hanging, and I'm proud of that deer. It was the biggest deer I'm probably ever going to harvest. And I can tell you that actually my dad harvested a whitetail in Canada. This was in, 2006 or something like that. But it was the biggest one shot by a non-resident. That was a pretty cool hunt. that was wild low fence deer too. It was a 200-inch deer. It was awesome. that's kind of how the hunting operation goes. And that way they come out there, it's all taken care of for them. Even if they want to arrange a cook, we have cooks, we have a maid or a lady who comes in and cleans up and does all the sheets and stuff like that after the hunters come, and they like that too. So it's a little bit different, but I mean, it's not quite like a hunting lease where you come out and put up your camper. Those are the kind of leases I've been on, and I've hunted on, some kind of a camper you're running off a generator, even if you got that, maybe not taking a shower for a few days, because you're out there hunting or whatnot. I mean, I've had some leases in Mexico where it was even worse than that. So, I mean, hunting out of tents and stuff like that. And I say worse, I mean, it's just not, that's hunting, man. I mean, that's what I like about it. I mean, I like going out there and camping out and roughing it and scouting. And yeah, I'll tell you, that's the other thing. I talked to you about that hunt I just got drawn for down in Atascosa. And so one of the first things I did was I started looking up, where am I going to hunt? Where do I think these animals are going to be? Without going to the area first to scout, it's like my pre-scout scouting. You know what I mean? Like I'm scouting where I want to go scout to have, to try to get an idea of where I might go hunt. So right. I want to put up my spot. But I use Google Earth a lot. I download Google Earth, the program, or use it online. And Google Earth is pretty cool. You can measure things in Google Earth. You can look at historical imagery. So you can see trails, from a year ago to this year, if they're heavier or lighter. I mean, and it's actually gotten very clear. Now down there, it's a lot of low brush. I'm able to see the trails, in places it's real thick and wooded. It may not be as beneficial. It doesn't show terrain necessarily, but as far as elevation and stuff like that. But I use it for more visuals. I use it all the time for fishing too. When I go down there and start fishing, I mean, that's, I use Google Maps and I map out my trip, or Google Earth, I'm sorry, and then I map out my trip and go fishing. Man, I've found some good fishing spots by doing that. But
it's a tool that I think everybody should use as a hunter, and if you're not using it, it really saves you a lot of footwork, and then you can mark spots and go check them out on your own. But kind of it helps you eliminate areas that probably aren't going to be productive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
So I think that's interesting that you're going somewhere else to hunt, yet you've got these places to hunt here. So from an outsider looking in, what is it that, I mean, it sounds like you still want to explore outside of the ranch. And that,
yeah.
So what attracts people to the ranch, and why do you leave the ranch to hunt other places?
Well, I think what attracts people to the ranch, I mean, honestly, is to come down there and, I mean, yeah, some of these guys, they want a place to hunt, bring their family and their friends and, maybe their children, and they bond with them and things like that. There's always that. I mean, that's how I got into hunting, was my dad wanting to take, he didn't care where, just wanted to take me and my brother out and teach us hunting and how to skin a deer and firearm safety and all these things. And so that's, I think when people come to the ranch, they want to come down there to do that. But it's also, I mean, that's kind of hunting. And then there's, a part of hunting, in my opinion. And then but honestly, they go down to the ranch, they want to harvest a nice trophy or, a nicer deer, or whatever, if that's what they're hunting for, if that's what they want to hunt. I mean, we've had some people that come out to hunt axis does just because the meat's real good. So, but I would say the majority of the hunters down there, they're coming to harvest a trophy. Now, a trophy's, a trophy to each their own, right? So, I mean, my trophy that I'm most proud of is not the biggest deer though on my wall, but it was, it's a buck that I'm most proud of because I hunted all season for it, because I had it on, an old school trail cam that I used to have, like the original cam tracker trail cam that with the old school film that, you had to go to Walgreens and get it printed, and I'd get my pictures back and I'd go through them and I'd have to spend the money on, there's, that's why I go hunting on other properties. Now, I hunt on ours, but I don't trophy hunt on ours, really. I go out there, I'll hunt with my bow. I'll hunt and try to find new areas, find better hunting spots or new spots for blinds. Like, I get a big kick out of that. I'm always switching up our blinds and our feeders. And and things like that, finding new little areas and spots. And I enjoy doing that. I enjoy trying to pattern a deer, trying to figure out a deer, what it's going to do. And I think that's what entices me about low fence hunting in areas I've never been to, never hunted at. It's a new area, and it's the challenge, and it's, that there are animals there. There's a hunting opportunity there, and then, but it's going to be work. It's going to be challenged. It's going to challenge you, not that, going and hunting at our own ranch wouldn't, but, after hunting there for 12 years, it's not as much of a challenge as it is on a, 12,000 acre national wildlife refuge or something like that.
Sure.
And so, and then at the end of the day, it's also the reward. One of the most rewarding things that I get out of the ranches that we have and operate is taking someone out there and letting them and teaching them how to hunt and firearm safety and harvesting their first buck and seeing that smile and seeing, that feeling you get whenever you get to harvest your first deer and introducing to someone into hunting. That is the thing that I enjoy the most about our two ranches, and that's what I get. I mean, and that's one of the main reasons I don't really hunt out there, is because anytime I go, I'm always thinking, well, I need to bring someone. Who can I bring? I want to bring someone to let them enjoy this too, because I always view it as an opportunity. I didn't have those opportunities all the time when I was a kid. My dad didn't either. It's an opportunity, so I try to give opportunities to others too. Bring them in, teach them how to hunt, introduce them to hunting. But at the end of the day, when you go out and harvest and you go do work and I've also applied for those permits for 3 years until I got one. So, it's just more rewarding, and it's not just whether or not I harvest an animal or not. If I don't, I'm going to keep continuing to try to hunt and learn and get better, and it'll make it all more rewarding when I get to stock my freezer and chat on some nilgai someday, hopefully.
Right.
God willing.
Right. So what do you say to the folks, the hunters that despise high fence hunting, the ones that when they listen to this, they'll be commenting on Facebook and having a real hard time where the high fence is involved, period?
Honestly, man, I completely understand. I used to was never even on a high fence or ever been to a high fence property until I was, 20 or so. I can understand why they would be not like it, and honestly, and I can respect that, and honestly, and then that's what I would just say is, like, I can respect that you like the low fence and you don't like the idea of high fence hunting. Some of these hunting operations that have, and this makes people mad, they may know someone or do have an operation like this, but you're on like 100 or 200 acres and it's high fence, and you're having hunts out there, and you have hunters come, and then they go buy deer or buy animals, and they'll put them on the property, a week or two before the hunters come out there and stuff like that. I don't agree with that. That's kind of high fence hunting I'm against, and I just think that's a little, it's just not hunting to me. That's just shooting. That's not hunting. But also I want to go a little bit further. I enjoy the low fence hunting, and I can completely respect that. And I think at a certain point, someone's trying to manage some property and, 1,300 acres, 1,000 acres. At what point is it okay? I don't know. If I was a hunter and I had, 200 acres and, I managed that piece of property, and I was the only one that harvested the animals off of it, and I had I had a herd of deer out there basically, and, that I'm managing and stuff. I'm going to know what's out there and stuff. It's just different than low fence. It's just that, my point is I completely understand. I just think it's a different type of hunting, I guess, is the best way to look at it. It's like hunting deer with dogs. I know that's very common in some areas, and that's just not, to me, that's like, I don't understand. You chase deer through a field and they come out of a wood line and they shoot them or something. Like, there's just different types of hunting, and I think, high fence hunting is just a different style of hunting, I believe. And there's, you can use dogs to track a wounded deer, but what about chasing a wounded deer? It's just like a high fence ranch on 300 acres versus 1,300 acres. I think, at a certain point it gets a little too small, but, it's just one of those things. If you want to try to It's a very hard topic,
Sure it is. It's very controversial.
I try to answer the question as best as possible, but I mean, in reality, it's just a different type of hunting. And honestly, all the things that they say about the high fence stuff, I can respect, and I do. And I can agree with some of it, to be honest with you. I'm not going to sit on the other side of the fence and say, well, no, that's not, I mean, I understand and I agree with some of the things that they may say about high fence hunting, and but I can respect it, and I try to respect, other ways of hunting. And I think honestly that's the main thing, is just try to respect other hunters. I mean, you would in the field, or you'd hope to. And it's just but I mean, yeah, there's some mistreat and there's poaching and there's things like that. Like that's the kind of stuff that I'm not cool with, or harvesting deer illegally and things like that. Like that's a big, like that rubs me the wrong way big time. I'm not cool with that stuff. But okay. Like I said, I can respect, and I respect low fence hunters. I am a low fence hunter, and I can understand that it's different than high fence hunting, and it's just a different style of hunting, I guess is the best way to put it, or a way to put it.
Gotcha. What about studies as far as science is concerned, where they're struggling with CWD or EHD or things that are causing problems in other populations? Is there anything that can occur or does occur at your level where we can maybe learn from these deer?
Yeah. So a couple of things, just like with any other, animals or even fish or anything like that. I mean, you take salmon, for example. They start growing salmon in farms, and they have to supplement feed them. And whenever you get salmon in a condensed area, just like an animal, they're going to be higher. They're going to be susceptible more to infections and things like that. So you have to give them antibiotics and things like that. So same thing with deer. I mean, in the pens, we have to, there's things that can happen and diseases and things like that. And so EHD, for example, in South Texas and in Texas, it kills and can wipe out a lot of deer breeders, kills a lot of deer. We just lost a deer to EHD. We suspect it's EHD, but the signs point to it. But I mean, there's certain things you can do to help it. I mean, EHD can be caught in the wild too, but in my opinion, I feel like when deer are in a penned-in area or in a more confined area, just like any other animal, they're going to be more susceptible to infections and spreading infections and viruses and things like that, like EHD. Now, I will say this, monitoring CWD, for example, now I wouldn't say because of deer breeding. Let me take that back. Deer breeding has helped stimulate testing for CWD, in my opinion. I know in Texas, for example, there was a ranch last year that got positive for CWD. Well, they came in and did testing and killed off some of the deer and stuff that were and positive, and they looked into it and they shut down, the transport of deer for a little while.
Right.
Texas Parks Wildlife did. And so, but now they're having live tests, and now they have all deer breeders doing live tests. It's more work for deer breeders, but it's more testing and more, watching and understanding those diseases like CWD wouldn't be as well understood, if there weren't, millions and millions and millions of dollars in deer breeding. I can assure you, because it kills CWD up north is pretty bad, and it kills a lot of herds and causes a lot of problems. So there's been there's been EHD vaccines that they've tried to come out with and all these different things. And hopefully one day we'll have some vaccines that we can give to some of the deer in the pens and things like that. So to answer your question, when you put animals in a confined area, yes, I think they're more susceptible to certain things and diseases and things like that. But, what a lot of people don't understand, and I may be reaching out there a little bit, but it's fine. It is alfalfa is a very common carrier of some viruses and bacteria. And a lot of alfalfa comes from the same areas. And you'd be surprised how many deer breeders, they don't feed a lot of it, but they supplement that with the feed that they give because it's forage and stuff like that. It's good for the rumen things like that. It has a lot of good bacteria, but it also has bad, and it can carry viruses. And so there's been some people that say that, you know, some of the CWD has been transmitted through some of the stuff that's gone through alfalfa and things like that. But, you know, it could be hearsay. But, you know, CWD's in the wild too. But they also do random CWD testing now on harvested animals. So the Texas Parks and Wildlife wild deer, especially in the areas that it's shown up in. So I don't think it's really adding to any kind of outbreaks or anything. If anything, I feel like it's probably helping it expedite the understanding of it and the prevention of it, just because there's a business and an industry that can be directly affected by it. I mean, it could be very, very much affected by it. So I feel like there's a big push, you know, and a lot of talk about CWD and deer breeding. I mean, any deer breeding auction or convention that you go to, I mean, you can't really go through the whole thing without hearing or seeing something about CWD, EHD, or talking to someone about it and things like that. I mean, we do things to monitor our deer, and I mean, we've taken them, and whenever they start coming down with, if we think it's, you know, EHD or something like that, we've kept a really low rate of mortality. But we watch the deer and we try to keep them cool. We have misters that go down the fence line sometimes during the summers when it gets really hot. I mean, there's little bitty things we do to try to keep any of that from killing the deer. I mean, we've even put them in the walk-in cooler before. We'd had to dart them and bring them in there to cool them down, because they get overheated and it kills them pretty much. So, and a lot of hemorrhaging and things like that. So, I mean, yeah, I don't think it's really spread a lot of diseases. I feel like I mean, now, you know, the Parks and Wildlife departments, they oversee the transport and the sale of deer, especially, I mean, I know in Texas, and I'm just referring mainly to Texas, but I know they do this in the other states too, but they're very particular. You know, you sell a deer, the transaction of the deer. When deer die in your deer pens, you have to send off a brain stem from the deer that die, a certain percentage of them.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And if you're not in the beginning, first 3 years of deer breeding, or of being monitored, I should say, you have to send off every brain stem of every single deer to get tested, and you have to pay for it. So, I mean, it costs you money when you have deer die too. So that's, I mean, yeah, they're costing you money, but actually you have to spend money when a deer passes away in most cases. So, but it's all for the testing, and it's all for, you know, the greater good and you know, the cause. I mean, we're trying to monitor it, we're trying to make sure, trying to understand it, and see why and what causes it, so we can help prevent it and maybe come up with vaccines for it. So, you know, I mean, I know a lot of people, they have a lot of bad talk about CWD, and deer breeders are spreading CWD and stuff like that. But, you know, that's my opinion on it. I wouldn't say deer breeders are necessarily spreading it. I mean, it's they're finding it in deer breeders because deer breeders test for it. It's because the Texas Parks and Wildlife and the other departments, they require testing for it to help catch it before it spreads, to keep it from spreading, before it spreads in their herd and they sell it to another deer breeder and it spreads in their herd and things like that. And I think that's what they're worried for, but that's what the testing is for. And so now, I mean, it's almost, I mean, if you're not a tier 3 deer breeder, which means you've basically been tested for 3 years, it's, you know, a lot of deer breeders won't buy deer from you. Okay. Because it brings their level back down to whatever your level was. And so everybody wants to be 3 or higher, because it means you're basically clear of those diseases. Your herd is, essentially.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Very good. This has been a very interesting talk about stuff we don't talk about a lot, and it's fascinating. I appreciate you giving us the insight to your world of deer management and deer breeding, and how you started the high fence area. And out of curiosity, and you don't have to answer this question, but this is just pure curiosity. You're not a sponsor on this show or anything of that nature. How much does it cost to go hunt at your ranch for a weekend?
It costs, well, it just depends. I mean, and that's another thing we do. We donate, we donate hunts every year. This year we have one. It's a Wounded Warrior hunt coming up in October, where we have a Wounded Warrior coming out, and he's getting a hunt. It's called the Trophy of a Lifetime hunt. So he gets to come out and he's going to get to harvest, a nice trophy off the ranch. So, but yeah, I mean, it usually depends on the size. If they're going for, a smaller deer, a cull deer, or a smaller management, or some of our bigger management or smaller trophies. I mean, those are ones. I mean, up to about a 150 is our management deer for us for out at our property. Just because they're just. I mean, at a 150 max or 145 or 140 max, like if he's a mature deer and that's about all he's going to get, we refer to him as a management, because most of ours, we like to have the big 10s and 12s that are 160 and higher, big wide main frames, and then they go way up into the 180s and 190s. But I mean, it can cost anywhere from $2,000 to $6,500, And Jay, can I also talk a little bit about the ranch too? I want to talk about some of the operations too, if someone's ever getting into this industry or can relate. But saving, watching your costs and things like that. One of the biggest expenses obviously is overhead, but it's also feed. When you get into the deer breeding operation, you really need to understand your feed costs and all your costs that associated with the deer pens. I mean, you got guys driving up and down the roads all the time. I mean, so you have to, we have to go and budget ourselves on everything that we do, whether it's our high fence. That's why we got into the high fencing. I mean, our ranch manager, he's a welder. He does all of our welding. I talked to you about, the high fencing and things like that. For example, like our vehicles, he does a lot of work on our vehicles, even our tires on all of our trucks, all of our vehicles. We use all tread right tires or American-made tires, and they're and we use them out at the ranch. They're really affordable tires. We use the Wardens on most of our vehicles, and they're real rugged. We put them we put a bunch of this gel in them that keeps the thorns from leaking, and I mean they last forever. But they're affordable. They're cheap. They're cheaper tires, but really good quality. They're called tread right. If you want to check them out, check tread right tires. But I mean, there's all sorts of things. Blinds. We build our own blinds. I mean, feeders. We try to repurpose the feeders. We put in new units. I mean, just little bitty things like that add up, and that's what I would say is you don't have to buy everything new. You can get good used tractors and things like that, but your feed costs. Don't do gravity fed. By gosh, don't do gravity fed, which is free choice. You want to have it on a spinner, a feeder, to where you can regulate it. Yep. Because just raccoons, varmints, you'd be surprised it adds up quick. So just budgeting yourself too, and watching your budget. And I mean that's. For managing and operating a ranch and an operation like that, that's the biggest thing, because you're not getting constant income. You'll get lump sums here and there, but that's another part of the management process that's pretty complicated.
Okay, all right. Anything else that you would put into that category of management that could help other people, even in no fence areas?
Just game management, and I'll just say this: regardless of whatever kind of management you have a management plan. Whether it's, hey, I'm going to put a food plot here to help bring in the deer to help give them some nutrients for the winter, or whether it's, hey, I'm going to protein feed, or I'm going to, genetically release deer. Have a management plan. Try to get as many people on board. Talk to your neighbors. Try to get them on a similar management plan. Talk to them. Say, hey, man, we're going to pass on these 3-year-old bucks. Can you all pass on it too? I mean, whether they will or not, it's always good. Doesn't hurt to talk to people about it. Communicate. Getting in good with your neighbors and the surrounding neighbors is always beneficial. Whether it's, hey, a deer jumped the fence, you got to track them. You can have them on call or right there. If you see some suspicious activity, you can call them. They know you. I mean, we've had gunshots happen down the road And our neighbor called us just to make sure. They were like, hey, I didn't know y'all had hunters here. We heard a gunshot. Want to make sure. I mean, little things like that. So, I mean, communication, talk to your neighbors, talk to your local feed stores, get to know your local biologist. And you'd be surprised. You'll start learning a lot of things through others. And forums, blogs, podcasts. I mean, it's all a way to learn more and more about, the whole operation and every aspect of hunting or fishing or whatever you may be trying to learn.
Gotcha.
Or do better at.
Well, that's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. And I appreciate you going into so much detail. It's really give us a much deeper view inside that aspect of a world that is kind of controversial, to be quite honest.
Yeah, it's very, very controversial.
Yep.
And it's very hard to discuss it, too, because it's just so controversial. And it's hard to discuss because I feel the same way as a lot of the guys sitting there arguing. I'm like, yeah,
right.
You know what, I'm with you, even though I'm in the industry. It's just kind of a part of this business. And so, I mean, you try to not do certain things and do certain things. Like, we've had guys come out and say, hey, man, I'd like to shoot that deer. That's a nice buck you have in the pens, Or we're like, okay, well, you want to hunt them in like a month and a half? Like, we're not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm sorry. Right. He's a nice deer. He's a breeder. We have some of his offspring are out on the ranch if you want to hunt and see if you can't hunt and find one, I don't know. And that's the other thing. I'm like, dude, you release that deer, there's no, you may not see that for another year or something.
Right.
But some people, they hunt like that. Teach their own. Teach their own.
So, Shawn, let's go on a deer hunt. Sounds like you have access to some incredible hunting, whether at your ranch or somewhere else. And I asked you at the beginning before we started recording to remember a memorable deer hunt. So I was wondering if you could take us on a little ride here. And where are we going to go?
All right. I could think of I'll tell you what. I'm going to tell you trying to think, either my first buck I've ever shot was down in Mexico or my most proud hunt. I'll go with the buck I'm most proud of.
Okay.
So I was hunting down in South Texas in Webb County, which is about 40 miles from the border or so of Mexico. And it was a pretty warm, early winter, fall. It was around Thanksgiving, and it was still pretty warm. We had a front that had blown through not too long before Thanksgiving, and I went down there with my dad and brother. And I had my hunting blind set up on a part of the property that no one really hunts. They don't think there's very many big deer there, but I saw some sign that looked like pretty good. So well, I'll try it. No one hunts back here anyways. So I had my blind set up, and I put up a tower blind during preseason. And I didn't quite get done finishing my senderos and clearing out the brush so I can see a little bit and make sure I have some good shooting lanes and there's nothing in the way. And so I was hunting, and then this buck came out. And it was real foggy that morning. I could tell. I was like, that's a nice rack. I mean, I couldn't quite see, but I could see it was this dark movement moving through the brush. And I was like, that's a nice looking rack. I mean, that looks pretty nice, from what I could see.
Yeah.
Anyways, and he goes in there and he's scraping up and marking his territory, and it was awesome, man. I mean, imagine just up in your tower stand, you're looking out across, a foggy field where just like a few feet is foggy, and you see these antlers, these tines just coming through and just tearing up a mesquite and water dripping off. I mean, it was awesome to see. And so he moved through, and he came by, and he came across one of my shooting lanes that I hadn't quite finished a little bit too far, and passed on through, and then kept on going. And I was like, man, I didn't get a shot off on him. So I kept hunting, and then the next day I hunted, and I saw him again. And he came, but it was the next afternoon when I saw him, and he was coming back, and he came back through that same route. But I had problems with both my shooting lanes. So the next morning I went out there and I hunted, and I didn't see him. And I was like, all right, well, I'm going to clear out my shooting lanes because I'm not going to let this happen again when he comes by. So I'm out there. So I get down out of my blind, and I walk over there, and I'm sitting there, and I'm breaking limbs and snapping limbs, not really cutting any. They were mainly like twigs and just mesquite branches. So, you can just snap them or bend them and break them. So I was snapping them, bending them, breaking them, and all this stuff. And at the corner of my eye, I look over, and I wasn't 35, 40 yards away. That buck's just standing there looking at me, just staring at me. And he's looking, he's kind of nodding his head back left, has his neck stood straight up looking at me. And he starts stomping that front foot. And then he puts his head down and he starts messing with the brush and stuff. And so I don't know if he was in the rut, so he was confused. He maybe thought I was another buck breaking stuff. I don't know what was going on with him. But, he didn't run. So I'm scrambling, and I had my four-wheeler backed up right up to that over by those trees. And so I'm getting my scalpel out and getting my gun out. I'm like, this deer's going to run off 100%, and I'm loading up my weapon. And I get a good rest on the tree, and sure enough, that buck's there. He's just looking at me, and I could tell. He turns sideways, and that tail goes up kind of a little bit, and he takes one look back at me and kind of stomps. Yeah, I mean, right before they're going to just, they're about to bolt, they kind of put that tail up and just kind of look. And,
oh, yeah.
And, I mean, I didn't have much of a chance to shoot him, and then I pulled the trigger, and he went down, and then I decided to I'm real big on giving them time to die and letting them lay down. And so I pushed my four-wheeler out a little ways and then drove off, came back after I got my father and my brother. Came back about an hour and a half later, and there he was, laying there about 30 yards from where I'd shot him. He was a nice mainframe 10-point. He was a little narrow, but he was real heavy, real typical, just real. He was probably 145, 148, and Boone and Crockett, and he was just, I was so happy about that deer.
Very cool.
Loaded him up on my four-wheeler and drove him into camp, and everybody's walking around looking at oh, good job, man. It was awesome. It was nice. a good time, man. That was fun.
That's awesome.
I was only about 14 or 15 then. But yeah, it's awesome.
Very cool. All right, I've got 10 rapid fire questions for you, Shawn.
Hey, also real quick, if you ever want to come down, you ever in Texas want to come down and shoot some axis or something, do some hunting, give me a holler. We got plenty of axis out at our ranches, and I'm going down there all the time. So,
oh heck yeah!
Figured I'd shoot the invite.
That'd be fantastic. Never done that before.
Yeah,
that's exciting.
But 10 rapid fire.
All right, you ready?
Sure.
All right, what's your number one hunting tip of all time?
Safety. Be safe. Always be safe.
God, it's such a good one and often overlooked one. Love it. What's that one thing that you have to have in the woods with you at all times, or you feel naked without it?
That's a flashlight.
Flashlight? Like
my knife. Oh, my knife. Shoot, my knife.
Knife. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Flashlight.
What's your biggest pet peeve in life?
Not achieving your full potential.
That's a good one. I like that a lot. How old are you today, Shawn?
31.
You're 31. What would you tell the 15-year-old Shawn Smith, knowing what you know today?
Get ready for a heck of a ride, and don't fret and fray. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and you're not going to go wrong. Follow the Lord. That's what I'd tell them.
Okay, very good. All right. You're at a hunting convention somewhere in the world, and a stranger comes up to you, and they ask you what you do for a living. What would you tell them?
I'm an entrepreneur, traveler, and an outdoorsman. It's my work and my passion.
All right. Very good. Excellent. What did you have for breakfast this morning?
I had some turkey sausage with some bacon and eggs and a smoothie.
And a smoothie. All right. Excellent. All right. You get your own billboard on the side of a highway. You can put anything you want on it. It's a blank canvas. What would it say?
One way.
One way. I like it.
I have a cross on it. Right. Or pointing up or something.
Right. All right. You get. Let's see. If I say the word successful to you, who's the first person that pops into your head and why?
I would probably say my father.
Okay.
Just that he's overcome adversity, and he's been at the rock bottom, and he's been on top, but he's always been humble, and so he's able to juggle it and manage it, whether he's on top or on bottom, and I think that's pretty successful, and he's been able to achieve the things that he's put his mind to, and he's always, the things that he fails at, he just gets up and keeps going, and I think that's pretty successful when you're able to self-motivate yourself and to get knocked down and get back up. I view that as success.
Right.
So he's very successful in my eyes.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. And what's a day in your life look like?
Oh, the day in my life is always something different, man. I mean, I'd be heading down to Galveston to go fishing off my solo skiff, or it's like a kayak, fishing for redfish in ankle deep water. I'll be back at the office that afternoon, signing checks, doing wire transfers, and then I'll be heading to the ranch that afternoon to go guide a hunt the next morning. I mean, it's always something different, man. I just roll with it and see what the next day is going to bring.
Right. Excellent. Very good. All right. And then finally, what's a deer hunting day look like in your life? Or are they all deer hunting days?
Well, they're not all deer hunting days, but my deer hunting days don't necessarily have to be spent in the blind. I mean, I'll spend a whole afternoon for 2 hours on my computer on, forums reading about, which units to hunt in some new area that I was, did a draw hunt in or whatnot. But I mean, a deer hunting day, I mean, if I'm able to go deer hunt, that's a pretty good day.
Okay.
But, yeah.
All right. Those are the 10 rapid fire questions. I think you did quite well, Shawn.
All right. I appreciate it, Jay.
Excellent. All right. So if we haven't covered enough information here today, where can we find more information about you and your ranch and your operations?
WhitestoneTrophyRanch.com and DeerStarBreeders.com. And you can also check out Deerstar on Facebook.
Gotcha.
And there's photos in there and stuff too, if you wanted a photo of like some of the deer that we're talking about, big typicals and stuff. So.
Okay. All right. Well, very good, Shawn. This has been an absolute pleasure and an honor to have you on our show. It's been quite insightful. And you've glad to jump in and delve deep into the life and subject matter of high fence hunting, low fence hunting, and deer breeding. It's stuff we don't typically hear from everybody on this show. So it's a little aspect that I think needed to be discussed. And I appreciate you coming on and letting us know what it's like.
Yeah. If y'all have any other questions or any follow-up, let me know. I can try to shed some light on any follow-up.
Thank you to Shawn Smith for how to go about making a facility, running a high fence, low fence operation, all the things that go along with it. And whether you agree with it or not, it's a fascinating subject. And it seems like there are a few things that we can learn from the managed areas that we can apply to the free range deer to make them healthier, stronger, and better. Dusty, do we have a Chubby Tines tip of the week this week?
I do have a Chubby Tines tip of the week.
The Chubby Tines tip of the week is sponsored by Morse's Sporting Goods. Firearms, used firearms, bows, used bows, located at 85 Kentucky Falls Road in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. Give Jim a call at 603-464-3444, morsessportinggoods.com. Your dollars go further in New Hampshire. There's no sales tax. Morse's Sporting Goods.
Chubby Tines tip of the week is going to talk a little bit about the pre-rut that's getting ready to come into play in the whitetail woods here in the next few weeks. We get into, I always say, like around October 25th through the Halloween, that you're going to see a little pre-rut activity. And what we see here in Ohio is that these bucks are going to start gorging on food. And, a food source is going to be a huge focal point for myself and a lot of other hunters that have been out there and witnessed the pre-rut activities. They're going to start really trying to pack on as many pounds as they can before this rut kicks off. Because we all know once the rut hits, it's nonstop on the run for, a solid month. And they try to really pack on as much nutrition as they can because they're going to deplete all their resources as far as nutritional as they started in the rut and chasing does. And it takes a really, really hard toll on their body once the rut kicks in. But also, you got to remember with the rut kicking off that these bucks are going to run the does. And it seems like daybreak, it starts out in the woods, and then they lead out to some kind of either a CRP or a cut cornfield, somewhere that they can keep a good visual on the doe. They can keep a good visual out for predators or hunters. So they go to them. A lot of times they go to them open fields, and that's going to be a huge focal point for myself to get to the fields and hunt the skirtings of cut cornfields or thicket, where the deer are going to naturally push out so that they can keep an eye on their does and they can keep the predators and the hunters in a visual sighting of anything that could bother them. They're going to want to get out in them fields, and it gives them more room to run, chase the doe, wear her down, get her where she's kind of wore out, where they can put the fancy on her. So I started focusing on tree stand placements along my field edges and if you got everything set up just right, I tell you, the rut can be really fun, but it's so unpredictable once the rut kicks in and what the deer movement's going to be. And you're going to see a lot of chasing, a lot of buck activity, cruising around, trying to find a scent trail, maybe on a hot doe. But with any luck, you'd be out there in the woods and old Mr. Big Boy run right under you.
Awesome tip, man. I did notice that when you were here and as I was out doing some last-minute scouting for a bear place for us to hunt or for you to hunt, I actually came across my first scrapes that I had seen all season. And, in fact, in pretty much every place we went, we finally saw some activity where the pre-rut is kicking in. In fact, I found a pretty good scrape behind my house today, so I was pretty excited that that's coming. So yeah, that's a very good tip and very appropriate for this time of year. Dusty, where can we find you when you're not hanging out here in the studios with me?
Shoot me an email, dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. You can look me up on Instagram and Twitter @ChasingAntler, Facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. Jay, where can the people reach out to you when you're not on the mic?
Likewise, you can shoot me an email, jay@bigbuckregistry.com, and you can visit us on Facebook, facebook.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Twitter, which is twitter.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Instagram, instagram.com/bigbuckregistry, and YouTube, which is youtube.com/bigbuckregistry. On YouTube, you can listen to all of our podcasts in their entirety. As far as videos are concerned, it's a boring video, but the audio content is there, so you can actually listen to our podcast. You can also listen to all of our live shows that we've done on Thursday nights when we do them, and we've gone back and re-interviewed a lot of our previous guests we had on the show just to put a face to a voice, let's put it that way. You can always listen to our show on other places as well, not just YouTube. We're found on iTunes, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, and Blueberry. And if you would like to submit a buck to our page for consideration and be featured on our page in front of 250,000 diehard deer hunting fans, all you have to do is go to bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck, and all of the instructions will be right there. I think that's pretty much everywhere we're at. I think that's a wrap, Dusty.
That's a whole lot of big buck, Jay.
Sure is. I'm Jay Scott.
I'm Dusty Phillips.
And this is the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Can't wait.